we're going to kick off. Thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar for Charged Together Fleets. Really excited today to present C Electric with Glen Walker, the Regional Director of Oceania. And yeah, Charged Together Fleets is brought to you by the Electric Vehicle Council, and they're the program owner. Electric Vehicle Council is a peak national body representing the electric vehicle industry. They advocate to government and industry and coordinate policy reforms and conduct market reports and analysis. Evergy is the sponsor or major sponsor and program founder. We're a software as a service e-mobility company working with governments and corporates to drive towards a sustainable mobility future. So for those that don't know, Charged Together is a pretty comprehensive program that was built with funding from ARENA and others. It includes Australia's first software as a service transition platform called Better Fleet that you can sign up to, a knowledge-based webinar series, which is what you're now on, and the LinkedIn community, which you can join on LinkedIn, Charged Together Fleets. So the key themes that we tend to cover in these webinars are case studies and use cases. We do technical talks. We get manufacturers like C Electric to present, and we also have policy discussions and updates. If people do have ideas about what they would like us to cover, please feel free to make recommendations. Happy to take those. So just to, I guess, a few things about heavy vehicle market before we kick off with Glen. We've done some research and others have recently, and it's really an exciting market, probably more exciting than people may have anticipated, and could be the breakthrough area that we've been waiting for. I guess the message is it's very complex, but it's doable. And I mean, part of this program is pulling together as customers and suppliers to collaborate to make it happen. And that's one of the reasons Charged Together is sort of being brought into existence. So why is it exciting? Three very quick reasons. Total cost of ownership is stacking up. There's a lot of reasons which Glen will talk you through, but a lot of it's to do with the heavy consumption that these vehicles have. The more routine use cases also help, and a lot of councils on the line will recognise that this is a major emitter. So when they look at their fleets and they look at where emissions are coming from, this is really where it's coming from. It's not easy. There's lots of things to think about: topography, load, peak requirements, and operational changes with overnight charging and having to recharge on the go. There's still things that need to be solved. Yeah, it's quite complex, but it's really pretty close, and in many cases it's actually there. And certainly it's very, very close in the long term. So what will require, and I guess, the Charged Together plug, it's going to require a lot of collaboration. So the focus of people on the line who are transport leaders or suppliers, it's working together to drive forward procurement, to give people like C Electric a lot of forward visibility, and obviously the role of the EVC, which is really focused on government policy support and grants. So I'm going to hand over now to Glen, and during this, if you want to ask questions at any time, put it into the chat box, and we will ask for it at the end. And I'll hand over to Glen. You probably don't need much introduction to C Electric. He'll probably give you one anyway, but I guess congratulations as a major driver of the Australian EV market, a company we can all be proud of. He's really done the struggles through the R&D over the last few years and has had the trials and tribulations. And Glen is their Regional Director for Oceania, and he's very experienced in the automotive industry, having worked for Kenworth and more recently MaxiTrans, and the CEO of Sargent Transport. So I'll hand over to Glen. I'll stop sharing, and yeah, really excited to hear what Glen has to say. So thank you for your time, Glen, and I'll hand over to you now.
Unmute.
You're unmuted. You're all good.
Oh, I am unmuted.
Oh,
there you go. Lucky I didn't curse. Okay, hopefully we're ready to go.
Yeah, it looks great.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was a very kind introduction, and very, very much appreciated. I've got a fairly, I guess, detailed and somewhat far-reaching presentation ahead. I'll I'll speed through the bits that are perhaps less interesting and spend a little bit of more time on the bits that are. There's obviously a time at the end for Q&A, so hopefully there'll be a few questions come from it. It'll stimulate some thought juices. And there's a couple of videos towards the end, and hopefully, technology permitting, it will all go according to plan. So, C Electric, who are we? Contrary to popular opinion, we have been around for some years. So it's not actually an overnight success story. There's still plenty of work to be done, and there was, to this point, a significant amount of work to get us here. So 2012, and we created a proprietary electric power system technology, which we call C-Drive. We are an innovator and a disruptor. The C-Drive technology is patented, and one of its features, it can be quickly and economically deployed across a number of different truck and van platforms. We operate in an environmentally friendly space. So it is fair to say that we have a very heavy sense of corporate social responsibility. And our employees certainly do feel a higher calling behind the work that they are doing. And it does provide an extra piece of motivation knowing that the things we're producing are doing their bit for the environment. So our truck configuration is quite different from where most people have produced or experimented with electric vehicles. Instead of putting the batteries where the fuel tanks used to be, and they generally sit either side of the chassis rail, we put the batteries where the heavy components, the motor and the transmission, used to be. So there's one where the motor was and one where the transmission was. And the purpose of that is it maintains the front to rear balance of the vehicle. So the foundation braking system is unchanged. And because the mass of these batteries is in the center of the vehicle, it's right on the roll center. So it actually improves the stability of the vehicles considerably. The motor sits in the middle of the chassis towards the rear differential. There's no transmission or clutch. And all of the various components that run the system are mounted where the fuel tanks used to be. Quite apart from the fact it's a new product, it's in a new space, we are operating in a very, very mature market. Trucks and transport is a very mature industry. And there are certain things it needs. It needs competitive, innovative finance packages. The fact that it's Australian made is a significant benefit in our marketplace. It is a unique transport task in Australia compared to anywhere else in the world. It's environmentally friendly, that's nice. We have a factory. You can come and walk around and see what we do. Australia-wide support, and I'll touch upon that in more detail later. The vehicles perform in their selected application very well. And the whole of life operating costs are actually quite competitive. And to drive one is quite a surprise. The instant surge of acceleration and no noise is probably the most profound experience. And you hear the wind going past the mirrors, and you hear every little squeak that the vehicle has. Ideal application is somewhere between 150 and 250 kilometres a day. One that starts at a base, either starts full and returns empty, or it starts empty, picks up along the way and returns full. And two obvious applications, an empty start is a rubbish bin, a rubbish collector, refuse vehicle. So picking up SULO bins along the way, it starts empty, returns back to base full, or in this case, a little delivery van, which starts full and returns to base empty. The approximately 500,000 of these types of vehicles are registered in Australia, and about 60% of them do less than 200 kilometres per day. And most of those vehicles reside in a capital city. Australia's population is very centralised in capital cities, as we all know. And we estimate that the potential market size would save 10,000 tonnes of CO2 every day. And that is across the light and medium duty market segments as they're specified in Australia. Medium duty in dark blue and light duty in light blue. There's approximately 20,000 collective vehicles sold in Australia each and every year. And that also gives you an idea of how old the medium and light duty truck fleet must be. If we're selling 20,000 every year, and we estimate the size of the market is somewhere around 500,000. There's a lot of these vehicles parked in places not doing much work, and a lot of them are getting quite old. Our products are generally focused in the light duty sector, less than 500 kilograms GVM, 4,500 kilograms, that is a car license. Less than 8.5 tonne is a light rigid license. Then into the medium duty sector, or medium rigid, into the medium duty sector, 14 tonne, 15 tonne, 22.5 tonne in a 6-axle 6x2 configuration. So those 5 vehicle configurations cover all of the light and medium duty sectors. Looking at segmenting that market a little bit further, we said first mile and last mile. Urban and regional municipalities is a key market for us, and then service vehicles and general freight, which is, as I've said before, the majority of 2-axle vehicles in capital cities today. And I'll talk a little bit more about each market segment as we go. Unlike a car is something of a discretionary purchase. You can want one, you'll therefore go and buy one. In a commercial vehicle, it's a little more hard-headed than that. First of all, you've got to need one. And the need could be your fleet is aging, you've won a new contract, whatever it might be, but you've identified you have a need for a new truck. You then select the type of vehicles that are part of your selection panel, and you have a look at their whole of life operating costs, maintenance, fuel, service, tear weight, finance packages, and so on, all play a role in what the whole of life operating costs will be, as does residual value. Driver appeal, there's a shortage of drivers in the market, so you want to make sure they're happy with what you're buying. Safety, reliability, fatigue management, and avoidance of fatigue, and overall efficiency. So operating costs flow directly through to the freight rate. Transport is incredibly competitive, and having lower costs and improved efficiency is a significant part of the competitive advantage that each transport operator has. And no transport or freight forwarder will pay more per pallet space of freight because it's being carried on an electric vehicle. And that's the fact. So these trucks have to stand or fall on their own economic and performance merits. A lot of folks ask me about residual values of electric vehicles, the fact that it's something of an unproven market. And you could ask yourself a similar question, but looking at the alternative assumption, instead of what is the expected value of an electric vehicle, you might want to consider what the expected value of a diesel engine vehicle will be in 5 years' time. And I would suggest that should be more of a concern to people than purely the value of the EV. Electric trucks, and specifically the hurdles we have faced to date. First one is we've generally started with a perfectly good diesel powered vehicle, and we've removed all of that expensive diesel powertrain all the way from the radiator through to the tail shaft. And that carries with it a cost and an efficiency and inefficiency burden from a starting point. Our vehicles are expensive, primarily because of the battery costs. Battery costs are coming down in price significantly, but they have plateaued a little bit. And most of the benefits of batteries now aren't going through into the cost, they're going through into the range. And think an iPhone has not reduced in price since it was invented. What they've done is kept adding features. And that's kind of what's happening with battery technology at the moment. Because of the way we've gone to market, they have been difficult to purchase. You need to start with a dealership, you then find a vehicle, you remove the drivetrain, you send it to us, we do our thing, we return it back to the dealer, often en route to the bodybuilder. It's a complicated process at the moment. It does work, but there's added time and complexity that we would prefer not be there. Support networks. We are very much based here in Melbourne. We have a presence in 2 other states, but most of our support is here in Melbourne, and it requires us on occasions to hop on a plane and go visit vehicles as and when we need to. From a purchasing point of view, lack of data regarding emission savings, performance parameters, vehicle reliability, finance methods is something that is absent in the industry. Vehicles cost more. Finance company looks at the full amount loaned and not the whole of life operating cost. So if the capital is more, but the expense is less, therefore the affordability of that loan should be more. But finance companies aren't taking that nuanced approach yet. But the whole process is all about managing risk and reward. No reward without risk. Minimizing the risk, you maximize the reward. So one thing we're moving forward on is, instead of using a glider, using a standard truck where we take away the charge air cooler, the radiator, the motor, the transmission and clutch, the exhaust after treatment, the fuel system and the AdBlue, and start with a vehicle that is in a million pieces instead. So that's the direction in which we are heading. Vehicle total cost of ownership. Almost without exception, our vehicles pay themselves off or pay back the original premium in years 4 to 5. And it's primarily off the back of the significant savings our vehicles have in electricity versus fuel versus diesel. Very expensive diesel compared to less expensive electricity. And in this particular example, this is a side loader refuse vehicle, $350,000 diesel vehicle versus a $650,000 electric vehicle. Payoff period is somewhere between years 4 and 5, primarily off the back of maintenance. Brake life is extended by almost a factor of 10, and the energy gains that come from, efficiency gains that come from not purchasing litres and litres of diesel. So, as I said before, with a glider, you've got the cost of removing these things. You've got a specialised chip, roll-on, roll-off boat. There's waste associated with that, and our service and support coming out of Melbourne. What we found in COVID-19 world, travel restrictions and so on, it's made it increasingly difficult to have a national footprint coming mostly out of one geographic location. And it's even challenged our supply lines significantly as well. We have a global supply chain from Europe, Asia, and indeed North America. And what has gone on in this world has been a real challenge for us in the last few months. So one of the ways we've responded, and this has been a long time in the making, is we have a truly globally significant relationship collaboration between C Electric and Hino Models Australia, where we will be importing semi-knocked down kits, so effectively trucks in a box, assembling them in our facility, obviously with an electric power system, and then retailing them through a select group of national Hino dealers. And here they are here. So 2 in Queensland, 2 in Sydney, 1 in Newcastle, 1 in Canberra, 1 at the border, 2 in Melbourne, 1 dealership with 3 locations in Tasmania, also Adelaide and Perth. So one of the key issues we faced in a COVID-19 world will be addressed. One of the key issues about complexity of purchasing will also be addressed under this arrangement. So we're really very, very excited about it. So we can fit 2 of these in 1 of these, and we can fit 4 of these in 1 of these. And the shipping alternatives for containers versus roll-on, roll-off are significantly easier to find as well. So again, inherent costs, efficiencies, producing an integrated vehicle all comes out of this semi-knockdown kit model. So as I said, pretty excited about it. It allows a full integration of the electric componentry, utilising local suppliers who in fact used to service the Fords and Holdens and Toyotas of this world. Designed, assembled, and it's fully compliant in Australia. So C Electric is the Tier 1 compliance plate holder of these vehicles with an Australia-wide sales, service and parts support. So lowering the risk is what this is all about. Some of the vehicles, first mile, refuse vehicles, ideal applications. This particular vehicle, we've built 3 of those in a really interesting partnership with the CMI Hino dealership in Melbourne and the manufacturer of these refuse bodies, Booker. They're the largest manufacturer of these vehicles these bodies in Australia. And this particular one has been on demonstration with a number of clients up the East Coast, and it'll do 400 individual lifts. In this case, you can see there are 2 bins on this lift, and it's approximately 900 bins. There's generally 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 bins per lift. It's operating for 10 hours in the crowded inner suburban streets generally, and it returns after those 10 hours with 27% of its charge remaining. This particular vehicle is operating in Perth, and it's got a much larger drive system, currently the largest battery system that we provide, and with a significantly 3,500 Newton meter torque motor. It's a very powerful motor. It does 1,000 bin lifts. They're individual lifts. 8 hours of operation, approximately 120 kilometres, 2 trips, 1 out empty, 1 out back, and it's got about 20% charge remaining. It's true in these applications, as you can see, 120 and 100, the amount of distance these vehicles travel has to be carefully selected so that they can perform what their actual job is, which is bin lifts. And a selection of them that we've built between Australia and New Zealand. One I just showed, that's a sister vehicle. Dennis Eagle, Hino and an ACO for Cleanaway. They've been excellent supporters of us. A company called Enviro Waste in New Zealand, East Waste, a recent addition to the fleet over in South Australia, WM Waste here in Melbourne, and this little thing called the Green Gorilla, and it's operating in Palmerston North, I think it is, in New Zealand. That's one of our existing municipality sales. And there's a couple of others other than these floating around as well. In refuse, and I'll give you this quick example, and this applies to every market we sell into, we focus on where the revenue is earned. And that's the collection phase, driving in the collection phase and the pickup process. Inside the bin, there's a sweeping process. Everything gets dumped into a hopper, then a big thing sweeps the junk into the back of the bin. And then there's a commute phase getting to and from the area where the product is picked up. And we've done a lot of work with many of our clients in that space, improving the efficiency of the vehicles to maximise the range. We do have a significant design development coming in about 6 months' time, which will add about another 30 to 40% to that range, which is, I guess, a change in the battery technology, a little bit more batteries on the vehicle, and a few other changes to the software. So we've got that on our drawing boards at the moment. But this sector, amongst others, any bit of extra range we can give them is considered very highly. Last mile, these vehicles are operating with a company called ANC, and they're carting on behalf of IKEA. And they've been very successful little vehicles in Sydney. They generally do a 9-hour day. They travel up to 190 kilometres a day, 11 drops. Between the three of them over a 9-month period, they carted 1,500 tonnes of freight, and they estimate, based on 2.62 or 2.68, whatever it is, kilograms per litre of diesel for CO2, they've saved about 60 tonnes of CO2 across those three vehicles. This Hino 616 is a new development, and I'll show you some of the development work that they're working on at the moment. It's targeted specifically at the car licensed drivers, 4.5 tonne, and we'll have a 1,000 kilogram payload in a temperature controlled vehicle and about a 1,500 kilogram payload in a dry freight parcel delivery space. 8 hours, we estimate between 150 and probably 180 kilometres, with an acceptable amount of charge remaining by the end of the day. And that is a completely acceptable range for a vehicle of that type. And I mentioned finance packages before. This particular vehicle here, the cab chassis, we can offer for $100 a day. Drive it away, 5 years, hand the keys back after those 5 years, and the residual is part of the finance package. There's a breakdown service covered in it. There's all of your maintenance, all of your servicing, just one price, and away you go. Again, it's all about lowering risk and about accepting that this is a way the market likes to buy things. And by having it as a variable cost, it makes it easier for financiers to accept the higher initial purchase price because it's amortized at $1 per day rate. Some of the examples, these are the same pictures of that IKEA vehicle. Another dry freight version of those vehicles. This is a slightly larger variant, curtain sider, and we've also got some vans, both in bus configuration and van configuration, operating around the world as well. Municipalities. I've got two trucks here, recent purchases in the municipality space. This is a little tipper, and it's powered by one of the smaller versions of our C drive. This thing goes out, it leaves at 7 in the morning, comes home at 3 in the afternoon, and multiple tips, comes out, comes back, comes out, comes back, never less than 30% charge remaining. And it picks up household refuse, so hard rubbish. This particular vehicle, slightly larger C drive configuration, and as you can see, it's a cherry picker, elevated work platform, and that's a very handy vehicle, power lines, tree pruning, and the like. Similar sorts of performance configuration, slightly bigger vehicle, but larger battery pack and larger motor to support the extra weight. And here's some examples: first mile refuse, last mile freight, and some variants of our cherry pickers. We held a really successful day for Victorian councils and municipalities late last year. And this is a list of the participants that attended the factory here. We held another one for South Australia. I think it was early this year. And we had these participants, total of 20 people, total of 40 people. And so far, we have deliveries for 2 Victorian state government enterprises, a New Zealand City Council, the ACT Government, City of Whitehorse, City of Yarra, City of Sydney, and the Brisbane City Council. And that's indirectly through Booker and CMI Hino for the refuse vehicle. We have orders in place, 3 more from the City of Yarra. God bless the good folk of the City of Yarra. We thank them very much for their support. Central Coast, Brisbane, Brimbank, Port Adelaide, Canterbury, Bankstown, and so on. And we have active quotes for a number of others. But really good opportunities to experience the full electric experience in municipalities, because all of the vehicles generally live at the one facility. They generally travel in that 100 to 200 kilometres a day. A lot of the vehicle fleets are hybrid, and so there's a great opportunity to have the electrical infrastructure within those facilities as well. Slightly larger vehicles, service vehicles and dry freight vehicles. This one is a dry freight vehicle operating in New Zealand. This is an interesting test case. It's a large 23-tonne GBM vehicle, has an aerodynamic body shape, lots of side skirts, and it also has an adaptation of our charging system. We only need 3-phase power to charge our vehicles, but we've installed in parallel 2 charging systems. So it charges at twice the rate. So it'll charge in about 4.5 hours using standard 3-phase power. We can charge in as little as 2.5 hours with a DC to DC 88 kilowatt per hour fast charger. But in this vehicle, 8 hours of operation, it gets some top-ups along the day as it's loading and unloading with 3-phase power, and it does 290 kilometres in a day across the 8 hours between Rotorua and Taupo and Rotorua Taronga, and it's a great little vehicle for Alsco. This one here is a larger vehicle with a cooling system, a refrigerated box, as well as an electric tailgate. So everything is run off the donor vehicle and the battery system. And as you can see, its range is less than this one, primarily because it's driving all of these other components. And at the moment, it doesn't have the charging top-ups along the way. But one of the key features of this vehicle is it's silent. So you can break a curfew. And a lot of, in this case, Woolworths stores have curfews, as do Coles, as do Aldi. So it's an important way they can improve their efficiency. And some other variants of these vehicles that we've built across Australia and New Zealand. Into the US, we have a very significant operation in the US now. So little Australian company is now spreading its wings. And these are some of the vehicles we've sold over there. A Ford F59 chassis with a Morgan Olson van delivering parcels from UPS. This is a Ford Transit. That's a Ford F750. And this one is a Mercedes-Benz Sprinter in a cab chassis configuration. And I have a very quick video here of our latest vehicle into North America. It's hit the roads only a couple of days ago. And that's operating in New York. And I think we can call this upstate New York at the moment. There's some absolutely stunning architecture. I hope you enjoyed how quiet that video was, and that reflects how quiet the truck is as well. I want to show you a couple of slides on, I guess, our design development. These vehicles that we produce are very highly engineered. This particular picture here is of what we call the power tower. All of the electrical components are seated here. This is the motor contained in its sub-chassis, and it picks up on standard mounting points inside of a van. And this configuration we're using here is highly adaptable to I guess a number of different vehicle configurations, and I'll show you a few of them as we go to the next couple of slides, and you'll see elements of this power tower in some of these other vehicles. So it looks very simple, but I can assure you there's a lot of intellectual capacity that's gone into that. Okay. And here's an example of that power tower in a 616 Hino chassis, which we're developing at the moment with the battery packs and the motor. Here is that same configuration in that Mercedes-Benz Sprinter. And energy, CO2. Trucks transport second highest emitter of CO2 in Australia. And yet most of the attention we have is on energy or electricity. And there's an opportunity for policymakers to focus heavily on things like transport. And for example, investment allowances and those sorts of things. It would be nice if they could encourage those investment allowance towards the uptake of some of our technology. But here's an example of what the future might look like. Here's a transport depot or a municipality with its own independent solar arrays on the roof, taking energy from the grid, which could be supplied by renewable sources, into a battery storage facility via the charging system that's set up into its truck fleet and its car fleet for that matter. In these trucks, if you connect 500 of them to the grid at the same time, you have the same battery reserve as what is in South Australia's Tesla battery. And at maximum spot prices of energy, that's a significant amount of money in each vehicle. Municipalities could collectively bargain for the energy and play an active role in grid stabilisation. Hot day, lots of air conditioners, you could park your fleet and sell your energy back to the grid. And there's a tremendous opportunity for relationships with third-party infrastructure people, energy suppliers, and indeed vertically integrating the whole lot through to your truck. And that's potentially what the future in our space may look like. So it's probably time for me to stop sharing my screen, I believe. And thank you all for, I won't say listening quietly because you might have been chatting away, but I certainly haven't heard anything. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much for that, Glenn. That was fascinating, and there's a lot of questions that have come through, and so I'll start with those. But obviously, got a few myself. There's a lot there that you covered. So I'll just jump to some of the ones here. The first question I've just jumped to is from Shane from Local Buy for the garbage compactor. I mean, there's a couple about garbage compactors here, but who's the project manager? Yeah, in this new configuration with Hino, which is obviously very significant, you know, who's the project manager? Who runs the show in terms of installation, implementation, support?
It is a C electric vehicle, and with donor componentry from Hino. So we take the parts that we need, we add the electrical components to it, and we end up producing effectively it is a C electric truck. and that C-Electric truck is then marketed through those 12 Hino dealerships nationally. So in the same way you buy a Hino from a Hino dealer, you would buy, in this case, the C-Electric version of the Hino through the Hino dealer.
Great. I mean, there's one here as well around the same area, but I think you actually might have answered it around partnering with the major waste truck manufacturers in Australia. I think you've built those relationships. I suspect, given that you were.
Look, we have, and the waste industry has literally been with us from the beginning. We put our first vehicle into that sector in 2017, and to say their support has been loyal is an understatement. And because in being there since the beginning, whatever bumps and bruises along the way, they have felt with us. And we are a better company because of the support of that industry. And the products we are producing are better than they otherwise would have been. And because of that industry, we can continue to innovate in their products and make them better and better. I'm not going to say we haven't had issues along the way. We have. When you're breaking new ground, when you're developing new technology, when you're pushing the envelope, you do make some mistakes along the way. But we are, the Australian industry, refuse industry, is stretching this technology further than anyone else has on earth. And it's a credit to them. And look, we're in it for the long haul, and we will end up with a vehicle that has the range that the industry needs to allow it to travel further to its pickup points.
Great. There's a question here from Barry Manor around the charge remaining. When you do represent that, is that the total battery capacity or proportion of usable capacity?
It's proportion of usable capacity.
Right. And I guess
it's we can't charge to full capacity because the system has regenerative capabilities. So instead of putting your foot on the brake, you use effectively negative torque coming out of the motor. And if you're at 100% charge, you would be trying to charge the battery at 105%, which clearly is not possible. So the practical charging limit is about 95%.
And I guess a related question to that, as the sort of the battery degrades over time, like when you're talking to customers, do you work on the basis of the battery, range on day one or in different conditions, or how do you relate that to somebody when you do a sales process?
Yeah, it's a question that's often asked, and at the moment we have only a theoretical answer, but there's nothing to say at this point in time that the theoretical answer isn't correct. What we're saying is that at 10 years of age, the battery will have 80% of the capacity that it had when it was new. And that is assuming it has a full charge and discharge cycle every day. So 3,650 days. And at the moment, what we see, there's nothing to say that rate of depletion is wrong.
Great, okay. Look, there's quite a few questions coming through. I'll just try to sort of wrap them into single questions because we're running out of time. But I think essentially there's one here in particular around, the sales process. Are you coming to Sydney? And do you have a proposal for a loan vehicles that people can sort of take them on? What is the sort of the concept if people want to move?
And that's a really, really good question. As you alluded to at the start, Dan, I have a trucking background, and I'm accustomed to dealership showrooms and dealership vehicles in stock, and the ability for you to not just touch and feel, but take the set of keys for a little while. And part of the relationship with dealers across the countryside is there will be vehicles in stock, but more importantly, there will be a demonstrator vehicle at each dealership as well. Now, there'll be a variety of configurations that may or may not be the right specification for the particular job, but it at least gives you a chance to take a set of keys and go for a drive. Because if like me, having been around diesel vehicles for close to 30 years, to suddenly have my first drive in an electric vehicle was an immensely confronting experience, and one that required me to sit in some nice green grass and smell the roses for a little while, because it was surprising how well it worked.
I guess a related question, which is what the Charged Together program is really about, is how do we scale this up? How do we drive supply? How do we build sales channels that can move faster? You know, you've talked about the environmental opportunities, and someone there has mentioned it in a question as well, or more a statement. Obviously, what we want to do is go faster, and let's assume the total cost of ownership, well, we believe it's pretty much at parity for many use cases today, not all the use cases, obviously. But let's assume it's getting there. How do we scale it up?
Yeah, and please don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. The environment is important, but in my opinion, it's more important that the vehicle performs well and does its job well. And while people are prepared to give it a try because of its environmental friendliness, and there's obviously an imperative and an importance to that, but at the end of the day, you might sell your first one because of that, but it needs to stand or fall on its own merits. And we are spending a great deal of time and effort making sure that the vehicles do perform as expected, and that we're not just relying on the environmental friendliness of the vehicle. The biggest issue we have is the upfront purchase price. It is more expensive, and it's likely to be that way for a long, long time, unless there's a new lithium-ion process or a new battery technology that comes along. They will come closer, but I think there will always be a disparity. And while we've got a significant difference in the energy cost going into the vehicle, and we've got the lower maintenance costs, fewer moving parts and the like, we've got an opportunity to provide a real comparison over the whole of life on how that vehicle will perform. And the industry is accustomed to buying vehicles over the whole of life and justifying premiums. There's a high degree of price variation from brand X to brand Y, and as long as you can show that justification, then there's a case to be made. But public policy can help, and it doesn't have to be free money. It could be, as I said, investment allowances. Admittedly, that has a taxation cost, but it's a very, very efficient way in our industry of stimulating demand, is allowing purchases of vehicles to accelerate the depreciation. And you've seen what's happened with the $150,000 instant asset write-off. There's many truck companies in June who have had a record month.
Yeah, so I guess, in summary, you're talking about finding the right use cases, making sure they work operationally, and then people will effectively buy them, and then looking at packaging and finance to make that sort of total cost of ownership work.
Yep.
None of that will scale. And is there any sort of supply chain challenges with a lot of, we work in the UK market, for example, and everyone was very excited until they couldn't, supply the cars. That was in the passenger market.
Yeah.
What are the sort of supply constraints or supply chain constraints?
Let's see, batteries are heavy and you can't put them on an aeroplane. So that limits the supply chain to the sea, and it adds a significant time component to that supply chain. And there is therefore a lot of cost embedded in that supply chain. So for example, indigenous assembly of batteries would be of great benefit to us. And by that I mean someone who makes batteries in Australia. They're very expensive to purchase over what is a 3-month supply process. And the suppliers to the industry are growing just like we are. And so we are challenging their capacity, and the industry is challenging their capacity. And there's a certain chicken or the egg process going on at the moment. You need orders to justify the investment, and you need the investment to justify the orders. So it's the industry is suffering some growing pains through that supply chain at the moment.
Well, hopefully, yeah, we can collaborate through this forum and help with that if possible. So just moving on to charging, because obviously the 3-phase charging has some issues around, load management on a site and doing sort of, as you scale a fleet on a site. So we've done a number of projects. We've looked at, scale up an entire garbage fleet.
Yep.
What do you see as the future in terms of I mean, you mentioned a couple of new technologies that you're introducing around charging. Do you see, what do you see in the future there? Is it, obviously there's a lot of different technologies. I'm not sure if it's your expertise, but things like vehicle to grid and these kinds of things. Do you see that as part of your roadmap in the future?
Absolutely, yes. It's we need to think of trucks as mobile batteries because that's what they are. And the battery element of the vehicle is something that we're not considering enough in that purchasing process. So like I said, you could aggregate them. You can use them to stabilize a grid when demand peaks at certain times. If you can break curfews, you can then use that energy at night, charge them up during the day when you've got lots of sun. And with charging, we chose 3-phase power because it exists pretty much everywhere. Every transport depot has 3-phase power. And what you need with fast charging, and this is when the transport companies have to establish those networks, is you need fast chargers just like there are car charging stations at various points. There needs to be truck charging stations at a grocery store distribution centre or receiving dock at a suburban supermarket or whatever it might be, so that that way the heavy vehicles, while they're unloading their freight, can be receiving a sugar hit via an 88 kilowatt hour or faster fast charging system.
Okay, yeah, loads of questions coming through. So one here from Bryn at Lake Macquarie Council. In terms of your sales process, how do you suggest a customer gets their head around the configuration, and how does it fit with their user requirements, and payback periods and finance and all that kind of stuff?
The short answer to that is don't try. Call us, and we'll work with you and do all of that activity with you. We'll get to know your business. We'll get to know your operation. We'll understand what your transport task is. We'll know what your facilities look like. And we can either help you identify or help you tailor a vehicle to suit the task you've already identified. We're pretty good at this now. The actual sales process of creating or tailoring is a better word, tailoring the vehicle to suit your needs. So the simplest way would be to call us, email us, and we'll hold your hand through the process.
And a question here from Lawrence at Bankstown, I believe, and that's around addressing charging from renewables. Is there specialised infrastructure from a solar array and batteries? Is there any specialised infrastructure they would require?
Yes, there is, and we recommend to, I guess, have the full experience is to work in collaboration with someone like us and someone like a charging infrastructure company who can manage that process for you. So solar arrays, charging points, and there's some really, and battery storage, and there's some really clever systems that allow you, sitting at your desk using an app, to determine what vehicle gets the preferential treatment on charging energy based on which one has to leave first, for example, or it'll tell you, it'll govern the charging rates based on what the price of electricity is as it fluctuates during the day. It'll present you with all sorts of reports on what the energy usage of the vehicle happens to be. So it's kind of a broad conversation. It's not just the truck. It can be just the truck, don't get me wrong, but there's other elements to the puzzle if you want to go down that path of backwards forward sharing from the grid's perspective, even making sure you've got a substation that can supply you with the energy that you need to perform the charging task that you need to perform.
So just two quick ones. Peter at Ku-ring-gai Council is a very quick one. Are you going to come to Sydney soon and do your roadshow?
Yes, we will. Unfortunately, as a Victorian, I'm kind of limited in my ability to travel at the moment. But the process with our relationship with Hino and the selected Hino dealers is very much going to be focused on targeting various client groups, having open days and displays, and in the short term anyway, whether it's via Zoom or whatever it might be, there's lots of things we can do to interact in the virtual space, and at the very least talk through what your needs and wants and desires happen to be.
Great, okay, and there's one question here on hydrogen and whether that's also a solution to battery capacity issues. We've only got about 30 seconds.
Yes, but it has its own issues. Very large pressure vessels, you can't take them in tunnels, which is a problem in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. You've got a whole new infrastructure of fuel that you have to worry about, and it's heavy. So the only way you'll see a zero emission vehicle halfway between Adelaide and Darwin with 3 trailers and 2 decks of cattle on the back of it in my lifetime will be with a hydrogen electric hybrid. So it does have, technology does have legs, but specifically for long haul vehicles.
Great, all right, well, we've come to the end, and thank you so much for your time. It's really been fascinating and obviously great turnout. Thank you everyone for attending. As I said in the beginning, we're super excited about this. We've just finished a full fleet transition program for one of the councils in Australia, and I can tell you it's looking really good, and hopefully we'll release some results. But you know, migrating into 2 depots and hundreds of vehicles is actually working. So really exciting, and you know, hopefully we can all work together and as an industry and as customers to work with C Electric and others. This and all the webinars are actually put onto the website. I'll ask if we can distribute the slides. A lot of people are asking, but otherwise it will actually be online. The webinars are all on our website, chargetogether.org. If you have any other questions also, you can email Glen or otherwise fleetau@chargetogether.org. And yeah, sign up to our LinkedIn page, and thank you very much for attending.
And thank you for having me. Wonderful.